The air in the courtroom was not simply still. It was compressed, heavy with the scent of cheap disinfectant and banked down human misery. Elodie Croft, draped in a borrowed, ill-fitting beige blazer, felt the tension like a physical weight on her chest. Across the aisle sat her husband, Jason Croft, a man whose expensive cologne and casual sneer spoke of untouchable arrogance. He believed his wealth was a cloak of divinity. Elodie was fighting for an emergency order, seeking refuge from the financial and psychological bruises he'd inflicted over 5 years. Then, in a final, contemptuous act of narcissistic fury, Jason lunged past his lawyer, his gold signet ring flashing, and delivered a sound that ripped the silence. A vicious, shocking slap to Elodie's face, right in front of the man on the bench. The man Jason Croft had just crossed was the Honorable Arthur Vaughan, and he was Elodie's father. The penthouse on East 68th Street was not built for living. It was engineered for looking. 8,000 square feet of silence and polished surfaces, it offered a view of Central Park that Jason Croft treated as a personal landscape painting, bought and hung for his pleasure. The furniture, angular and unforgiving, was all sharp marble and cold chrome, chosen by a Milanese designer who had never once asked what Elodie might find comfortable. Nothing in the space breathed warmth, nothing was meant to be touched, and nothing, absolutely nothing, belonged to Elodie. For 5 years, Elodie Hayes, now merely Elodie Croft, had existed here as a beautiful, pale ghost. She had met Jason when she was 24, desperate to find a world outside the formidable, demanding shadow of her father, Arthur Vaughan. Jason, a managing partner at his own high-level private equity firm, Croft Capital, had been a gravitational force. Decisive, magnetic, a man who pursued her with a laser-focused intensity she had foolishly confused with passion. He had acquired her, as he acquired all beautiful things, with relentless, overwhelming effort. Her father, a man of quiet, unyielding principles, had seen the transaction for what it was. "He doesn't love you, Elodie," Arthur had warned her, his voice heavy with the weight of years spent judging human depravity. "He wants to own you. A man like that only values things he can acquire." Elodie, blinded by the electric glamour and the desperate need to prove her independence, had chosen Jason. That choice had cost her everything. The 5-year silence with her father, a self-imposed banishment, had begun the day she moved in, a silence that had become its own form of prison. At first, the bars had been gilded. The love was suffocating in its generosity, an unlimited black Amex, trips to St. Bart's and Dubai, a closet overflowing with designer labels she'd never had the desire to wear. But the generosity was a sophisticated leash. The gifts were surveillance. The Amex was swiftly replaced by a strict, monitored allowance that forced her to justify every purchase. Her sleek sedan, her last vestige of independent movement, was deemed not secure enough and sold, leaving her entirely reliant on Jason's driver. Her friends, the ones who reminded her of her old, vibrant self, were branded jealous and bammed influences. Jason would host dinners and, with a subtle, surgical precision, humiliate them until they stopped calling. Elodie didn't realize she was isolated until she looked up one day and found herself entirely alone in the 8,000 square feet of sterile luxury. Her one true escape, her defiant whisper of selfhood, was her painting. She was a talented abstract expressionist, favoring the deep, bruising colors of the unconscious. Jason had initially indulged it, building her a state-of-the-art studio in the penthouse, complete with perfect north light. It was merely another acquisition, another box to tick. Soon the studio became a tool. He would walk in, impeccable in a suit that cost more than her former annual salary, and stand before a canvas of swirling blues and violent purples. "That's bleak, Ellie," he'd say, the disapproval slow and measured. "Are you depressed? You have everything. Why can't you paint something happy? You should be painting flowers. You're so ungrateful." The breaking point arrived not with a spectacular bang, but with the quiet, devastating tear of a forgotten email. Elodie had been secretly working on 5 pieces for a small, independent gallery show in Chelsea, an opportunity brokered by an old college friend. It was the first act of self-determination she had committed in years. Jason found the thread. He didn't yell. Yelling was crude and beneath him. He walked into the studio, wearing a $4,000 Brunello Cucinelli suit, and stood before her, completed canvases. The air in the room became lethally still. "You're embarrassed by me," he said, his voice flat, calm and terrifying. "What? No, Jason. It's just a small show. It's for me." Her old self flashed, a brief, desperate spark of defiance. "It's for you," he repeated, nodding slowly, a practiced, lethal sarcasm. "You go behind my back, making me look like I can't provide, making me look weak." "It has nothing to do with you," she cried. "It's mine." "Mine?" he mused. He picked up a can of turpentine, a common artist's solvent, which sat neatly on the shelf. "Is it?" Before she could process the movement, he was destroying them. He didn't slash the canvases. That would be a mess. Instead, he poured the turpentine methodically, letting the solvent melt the gesso and oil paint. The color ran and bled like tears down the pristine white canvas. He was erasing them, dissolving her voice, her work, her existence. When he was done, he placed the can neatly back on the shelf, his pristine cuffs still perfectly white. He looked at the 5 weeping canvases, the colors reduced to mud. "Now they're nothing," he said, "just like you are without me." Something cold and sharp snapped within Elodie. The fear that had paralyzed her for 5 years was replaced by an absolute, freezing clarity. He had crossed the final line. He had tried to erase her soul. He had forgotten that you cannot burn down a house that is already empty. That night, while he slept the sleep of the profoundly unburdened, she packed a single, worn travel bag. She took the $400 she'd squirreled away in the hollowed-out pages of an old book. She left the gold cage and stepped out into the pre-dawn silence of the city, not looking back. Her prison was now behind her. The New York County Family Court on Lafayette Street was a monument to human misery. It was a place where lives were systematically disassembled, documented in triplicate, and stamped by indifferent clerks. The air smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and a pervasive, aching desperation that Elodie recognized, because it was now her own. She sat on a hard wooden bench, her hands clasped between her knees to conceal their violent trembling. She was wearing the only professional outfit the shelter's donation closet could provide, a beige blazer, 3 sizes too big, and a simple black skirt. She felt exposed, looking exactly like what she was, a refugee from a life of gilded trauma. Across the hall, Jason Croft held court. He was flanked by 2 suits from a white shoe firm, the cost of their tailoring exceeding Elodie's entire college tuition. The lead counsel, Marcus Ryland, was the notorious legal shark, infamous for his predatory smile and his talent for shredding victims on the stand. Jason, in contrast, looked completely relaxed. He was checking his stock portfolio on his phone, occasionally laughing at Ryland's whispered comments. He caught sight of Elodie, and his face registered not anger, but a profound, casual amusement. He walked over. His expensive cologne, A scent she had once associated with passion and power now made her stomach clench with visceral dread. "Ellie, Ellie, Ellie," he said, crouching down so his eyes were level with hers. His voice was a low, intimate hiss designed to bypass the conscious mind and go straight to the fear center. "This is so embarrassing." He gestured dismissively at her borrowed attire. "For you. Look at you. You look like a pauper. Did you really think this was going to work?" Elodie stared at the cracked linoleum floor. "Leave me alone, Jason." "Leave you alone, honey. I'm trying to save you. You're having a breakdown. It's understandable. You're fragile." He reached out to brush her hair from her face. She flinched violently, her entire body recoiling. His eyes went instantly cold. The charm evaporated. "You pull that in there and you're done," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. "You think any judge is going to give you a dime? I'll have you declared mentally incompetent. You'll walk out of this with nothing. Not my name, not my money. Nothing. This is your last chance. Walk out that door, get in my car, and we can forget this little episode." "Mrs. Croft?" A new voice cut through the private terror, sharp and slightly stressed. Elodie looked up. A young woman, barely older than her, with a frazzled bun and a briefcase threatening to explode at the seams, was holding out her hand. "Sarah Jenkins, legal aid. Sorry I'm late. The traffic was a nightmare." Jason stood up, his demeanor snapping instantly back to one of dismissive, patronizing charm. "Ah, the cavalry. Well, you've got your work cut out for you. My wife is unwell." Sarah Jenkins looked Jason up and down with a practiced, utterly disdainful assessment. Elodie felt a flicker of admiration. "Mr. Croft," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I'd advise you to direct all future communication to me and step away from my client." Jason chuckled, holding his hands up in mock surrender. "Whatever you say. See you inside, Ellie." He walked back to Ryland, who clapped him on the shoulder. Sarah sat down beside Elodie, placing the overstuffed briefcase between her knees. "Okay, here's the situation. It's not great. They've buried us in paperwork. They've got affidavits from your doorman, your driver, and a psychiatrist I've never heard of, all saying you're prone to hysterical fits and delusions. They're going to paint you as a gold digger who's lashing out because he cut you off." "But he destroyed my studio," Elodie choked out. "He trapped me." "I know, and we have the photos you took, but it's your word against theirs. And they have a lot more theirs than we do." Sarah paused, running a hand through her already messy hair. "Now here's the other wrinkle. The scheduled judge, Peterson, had a family emergency. We've got a substitute, a visiting judge from the criminal circuit. Vaughan. Arthur Vaughan. They call him the Hammer. He's new to family court, but he's tough, by the book, and has zero patience. This could be good. He won't be swayed by Ryland's charm, or it could be very, very bad. Stick to the facts. No tears. Just the facts. Are you ready?" Elodie's blood turned instantly, terrifyingly cold. Vaughan? Arthur Vaughan? It couldn't be. The name was common. It had to be a coincidence. Her father was in the major case division. Murders, organized crime. He wouldn't be here, in the grubby, chaotic trenches of family court. It was impossible. She was just panicking, seeing his name everywhere. "Elodie." "Yes," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs for an entirely new, agonizing reason. She straightened the borrowed beige blazer, summoning the cold clarity she'd found the night she fled the penthouse. "I'm ready." The courtroom was called to order. "All rise!" The bailiff, Officer Miller, bellowed, the Honourable Arthur Vaughan presiding. Elodie stood, her legs feeling like hollow tubes. The side door opened, and he walked in. It was him. He was older. The 5 years had carved deeper, unforgiving lines around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair was now a distinguished, severe silver at the temples. But the rigid posture, the same sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing. It was Arthur Vaughan, enveloped in the heavy black robes of his office. He looked less like her father and more like an archetype. The judge. Elodie's lungs felt empty. She gripped the back of the chair in front of her. "He's here. He's here." Arthur Vaughan settled into the high-backed leather chair and looked out over the courtroom. His eyes swept the room, cataloguing everything. Jason, Ryland, Sarah. And then they landed on her. For one fleeting, terrible tenth of a second, the mask of judicial impartiality slipped. Elodie saw it. It wasn't just recognition. It was a deep, profound, gut punch of shock. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He saw her, the borrowed blazer, the terror etched into her face. Then, just as quickly, the mask was back. His face became stone. He looked away, shuffling papers. "Oh, God," Elodie whispered, sinking into her chair. "What is it?" Sarah asked, alarmed. That's my father." Sarah Jenkins's head snapped toward the bench, and then back to Elodie, her jaw slack. "What? Are you serious?" "Elodie, this is a massive conflict of interest. He has to recuse himself. Will be postponed, sent back to the start." "No," Elodie said, a strange, cold calm settling over her. She watched the man on the bench refuse to look at her. "He won't. Because he's the most principled man I've ever met. He would see it as a failure, a weakness. And he's not looking at me. He's pretending he doesn't know me." The second realization hit her harder than the first. He saw her here, broken and a victim, and he was ashamed. At the other table, Jason Croft finally put his phone away, nudged by Ryland. He glanced at the judge. "Who's the fossil?" he whispered, just loud enough for Elodie to hear. Ryland shrugged dismissively. "You may be seated," Judge Vaughan's voice boomed, amplified by the microphone. It was the voice that had read her bedtime stories, taught her to ride a bike, and told her 5 years ago that Jason Croft would destroy her. The courtroom was smaller than Elodie had imagined from the movies, all sickly beige walls and fluorescent lights that cast a harsh, greenish tint on everyone's skin. It was utilitarian, sterile, and entirely functional, a machine for the methodical processing of broken lives. Jason and his team claimed the right side of the room, spreading out their files and laptops with an air of bored, established ownership. Ryland, his lead counsel, looked like a predator who had simply grown tired of waiting for the kill. He was busy arranging a stack of documents, affidavits, motions, and what Elodie knew were lies, that looked impossibly thick against the single worn briefcase Sarah Jenkins placed on the petitioner's table. Elodie took her seat on the left. The beige blazer felt heavy and hot, smelling faintly of the shelter's cheap laundry detergent. She gripped the edge of the table, focusing on the dark wood grain to keep the world from spinning. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear back into the anonymity of the shelter, anything but sit there and be flayed open in front of the 2 men who had ruled her existence. On the high bench, Judge Arthur Vaughan was a study in profound, rigid composure. He had not looked her way since that initial fraction of a second slip. He was deep in the file, his severe silver hair catching the fluorescent light. He wore the black robes not as a costume, but as armor, distancing himself entirely from the human drama unfolding below. "He's ashamed of me," Elodie thought again, a cold, hard stone settling in her stomach. He was choosing the law, choosing his unyielding principle of judicial neutrality over her. She recognized the pattern. It was the same pride that had prevented him from calling her 5 years ago, the same damn stubborn pride that had allowed Jason to isolate her. "We are here on Petition 24 FA 1081, Croft vs. Croft, regarding an emergency order of protection," Judge Vaughan's voice boomed, amplified and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the voice of the court, not the voice of her father. "Counsel, please state your appearances." "Sarah Jenkins for the petitioner, Elodie Croft, Your Honor." "Marcus Ryland for the respondent, Jason Croft, Your Honor." Ryland's tone was smooth, confident, dripping with the unspoken assumption of victory. "Very well," the judge said, his eyes fixed on the file. "Ms. Jenkins, you may begin." Sarah, though clearly rattling from the discovery of her client's familial connection to the presiding judge, was a professional. She stood and laid out the facts, sticking rigidly to the script they had prepared. She spoke of the patterns of coercive control, the financial isolation, the verbal degradation. "Your Honor," Sarah concluded, her voice steady, "Mr. Croft has systematically dismantled my client's life. He isolated her from friends and family, seized her financial assets, and 3 days ago destroyed her personal property, her artwork, in a fit of rage. Mrs. Croft is in fear for her safety and her sanity." Judge Vaughan stared unblinking at Sarah. His judicial persona was absolute. "And this fit of rage, Ms. Jenkins, was there any physical violence? Did he strike your client?" Sarah admitted the key weakness of their case. "No, Your Honor, but he—" "This is family court, Counselor," Ryland interjected smoothly, rising to his feet with casual arrogance. "Not art criticism class. My client's wife is an amateur painter. They had a disagreement over her hobby. She became hysterical, and in her—" "Mr. Ryland," Judge Vaughan cut him off. The voice was suddenly like chipped ice, dangerous and utterly final. "You are not testifying, and you will wait your turn. Sit down." Ryland, entirely unused to such blunt, cold command, blinked in genuine surprise. He hesitated, then grudgingly obeyed, sitting down hard. Arthur Vaughan turned his cold eyes back to Sarah. "I have read the respondent's counter-motion. He claims your client is the one with the history of emotional outbursts. He claims she is the one who poses a threat. He has submitted numerous affidavits to that effect." "That is a complete fabrication, Your Honor. It is a classic tactic of an abuser to twist the narrative to claim the victim is the aggressor." "That will be for me to decide," Judge Vaughan said. "Call your client to the stand." Elodie walked to the witness stand on legs that felt like they were filled with sand. The bailiff administered the oath. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the fear paralyzing her throat. "Speak up, Mrs. Croft," Judge Vaughan commanded, the microphone amplifying his impatience. He didn't use her name. He didn't look at her. He was staring at a spot on the wall just behind her head. He was a complete, cold, impartial stranger. "I do," she said, louder this time, her voice shaking but clear. The interrogation had begun. Sarah began her questions gently, guiding Elodie through the last 5 years. The penthouse, the isolation, the controlled allowance, the slow, systematic demolition of her self-worth. It was a testimony of emotional and economic asphyxiation. "And the incident 3 days ago," Sarah prompted, her voice soft but firm. "Tell the court what happened." Elodie recounted the confrontation, the terrifying calm in Jason's voice, and the utter devastation of watching her life's work, her last flicker of identity, dissolved into sludge by the turpentine. He didn't hit me," she admitted, her voice trembling again. "He just erased me. He said, 'Now they're nothing, just like you are without me.'" From the corner of her eye, she saw Jason scoff and whisper something dismissive to Ryland. "Miss Jenkins," the judge interjected, his voice flat, cutting straight to the judicial bone. This is all very subjective. He erased me. He made me feel. This court deals in facts. Did he threaten you with physical harm? Elodie's stomach dropped. He was siding with Jason. Her own father was siding with the man who had broken her. The shame she'd felt earlier turned into a hot, bitter surge of anger. Her carefully maintained composure snapped. "He controls every penny I have, Your Honor," she said, her voice hardening with defiance. "He took my car keys. He took my phone. He locked me in the penthouse after an argument once for an entire weekend. Is that a fact? Is that subjective?" "Objection!" Ryland shouted, leaping to his feet. "Relevance, and this is the first we're hearing of this locked-in allegation." "Sustained," Judge Vaughan said, not missing a beat. He rubbed his temples, a ghost of a familiar gesture. "I will disregard that last statement. Stick to the petition, Mrs. Croft." Elodie looked at him, pleading with her eyes, but he would not meet her gaze. He was a stone monument of law, cold and unyielding. Her father was gone. There was only the judge. "I have no further questions," Sarah said, defeated, sitting down. "Mr. Ryland, your witness." Ryland walked to the podium like a lion approaching a wounded gazelle, his silk tie shimmering under the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Croft," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "This allowance your husband gave you, how much was it?" "It varied. $5,000 a month." "5,000," Ryland repeated, allowing the number to hang in the air for the benefit of the working-class people in the room. "For your hobbies, lunches, pin money. And this was on top of a roof over your head. Food, cars, and lavish vacations, correct? Yes or no, Mrs. Croft? Did you have to pay for your own rent, your own food, your own utilities? No, but no. So this financial prison was a $5,000 a month play fund. Must be nice." "Objection," Sarah snapped. "Argumentative. Sustained. Watch your tone, Mr. Ryland." "My apologies, Your Honor. Mrs. Croft, isn't it true that you come from a very strict home?" Ryland pressed, twisting the knife. Elodie froze. "I don't see how that's relevant." "Oh, I think it is. Isn't it true that you've always had a problem with authority, particularly male authority? Isn't it true you stopped speaking to your own father simply because he disapproved of your lifestyle? The ultimate humiliation, arguing about her broken relationship with her father in front of her father. My relationship with my father is private. So is your marriage, Mrs. Croft. Yet here we are. Isn't it true that you are, by your own admission, emotionally volatile?" "No." Jason, he twists my words. "So you deny sending these text messages to my client?" Ryland produced a sheath of papers, printouts, obviously edited or entirely fabricated. "I hate you. I hope you crash your precious car and die. You are a monster, and I will ruin you. If you leave me, I will kill myself. I'll tell everyone you've been beating me. I will burn this place to the ground." Elodie's face went white. I never wrote that. I never wrote any of that. He faked those. Jason, that's a lie." Jason across the room put his head in his hands, perfectly performing the portrait of a long-suffering, victimized husband. "See, Your Honor," Ryland said smoothly. "Hysteria. She's fabricating claims of abuse because my client finally decided he's had enough of her abuse. This entire petition isn't for her protection. It's for leverage in their divorce. It's a money grab, plain and simple." Elodie was hyperventilating, the lies crushing the breath from her. "He's lying! He's lying, Your Honor! Dad, please!" She caught herself. "Dad." The courtroom went silent, the single word echoing in the sudden, crushing vacuum. Judge Vaughan's face was bloodless white. He gripped his gavel. Mrs. Croft, you will refer to me as Your Honor, and you will get a grip on your emotions." Jason's head snapped up. He stared at Elodie, then at the judge. A slow, confused, then horrified understanding dawned on his slick face. Vaughan. Elodie Vaughan. Arthur Vaughan. Ryland, however, only saw an opening. "She's unraveling, Your Honor, and she just called you Dad. Is she delusional? Is she trying to manipulate you by implying some sort of paternal connection? This is grounds for dismissal. It's courtroom misconduct." Before the judge could respond, he slammed his gavel down once. "Recess. 10 minutes. I want to see counsel in my chambers now." He stood and swept out of the room, his robes billowing behind him. Elodie collapsed into her chair, sobbing, convinced her father hated her. Across the aisle, Jason Croft stared at the empty doorway, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. "Ryland," he hissed, grabbing his lawyer's arm. "We have a problem, a big problem." The 10-minute recess was a lifetime spent in a pressurized silence. Jason's panic was a palpable, foul energy. "His name is Vaughan. Her maiden name is Elodie Vaughan. That's her goddamn father, Ryland." Ryland, the celebrated legal shark, looked as though he'd been shot. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a ghastly pallor. "He has to recuse. This is an immediate mistrial. All of this is void." Jason leaned forward, his voice a manic, desperate whisper. "Why didn't he? Because he hates her. Didn't you hear him? He's on my side. He's embarrassed by her. This is perfect. He's going to rule against his own daughter to prove he's impartial. We've got this, Jason." Ryland's professional instincts screamed dissent. "That's insane, Jason. That's not how this works. We need to file a motion for recusal immediately." "No," Jason snarled. "You do that, and we get a new judge who might believe her sob story. This guy, he already hates her. We're going to use it. Now go file a motion for the bailiff to let us use the restroom. I need a minute." Across the room, Elodie was a wreck. Sarah was whispering frantic reassurances, but the image of her father's stone face, his immediate repudiation of her public cry, confirmed all her darkest fears. "He's going to rule against me, Sarah." I saw his face. "He's ashamed of me," Elodie choked out. "He's not ashamed of you, Elodie. He's trapped," Sarah insisted, gripping her arm. "He knows Ryland. He knows if he shows you one shred of sympathy, Ryland will have this entire case thrown out on appeal. He's being a judge. That's all he knows how to be." Before Ryland and Jason could make it out, the side door opened. Officer Miller shouted, "All rise!" Judge Vaughan returned to the bench. His face was granite, his silver hair severely parted, his posture rigid. He did not sit immediately. He remained standing, staring at Ryland and Jason with an expression of profound, surgical detachment. "Counsel," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, stripped of its earlier thunder. "After reviewing the evidence packets, I will not be hearing you in chambers. We will proceed." Jason's face, which had been pale, now looked relieved. He's sticking to it. He's playing impartial. "Mr. Ryland, your client may return to his seat. Your cross-examination is over." Ryland, baffled by the sudden, premature termination of his attack, started to protest. "But, Your Honor, it's over. Sit down." The order was delivered with the finality of a death sentence. Ryland, stunned into obedience, sat. "Miss Jenkins, your witness may step down." Elodie, shaking, stood up from the witness box. Her path back to the petitioner's table took her directly past the respondent's table, past Jason. Jason saw his window. He had miscalculated the judge's coldness as favor, and now he was cornered, his prized lawyer silenced. The narcissistic rage, the fury at having his own vulnerability almost exposed, took over. He stood up, blocking Elodie's path. "Jason, move!" she whispered, terrified, glancing quickly toward the bench. "You're pathetic," he hissed, his face just inches from hers. The expensive cologne, the scent of control and poison, overwhelmed her. The courtroom was watching. The judge was watching. Jason didn't care. "You really thought you could come here and lie? You thought you could manipulate your own father?" His whisper was laced with venom. "He hates you, Elodie. He's disgusted by you. You're finished. You're nothing. You're going to walk out of here with nothing but that cheap, ugly blazer." A terrible calm settled over Elodie. She looked past the venom, past the fear, and saw the small, terrified bully beneath the facade. She found a sliver of the old steel she thought had been extinguished 5 years ago. "You're a monster, Jason," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "He knows. He knows what you are." Jason's sneer widened, revealing the entitled, contemptuous cruelty that had always been at his core. An ungrateful bee. It happened in the compressed, silent instant before anyone could react. It wasn't a theatrical, open-handed swing. It was a short, sharp, vicious slap. His right hand, heavy with the thick, gold signet ring he wore as a badge of his family's self-made power, cracked across Elodie's left cheek. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Elodie stumbled backward, crashing into the railing that separated the public gallery. She cried out, a sharp, ragged gasp of pain and pure shock. Time shattered. Sarah Jenkins screamed, a sound that finally broke the silence. Marcus Ryland's $5,000 laptop slipped from his hands and crashed to the linoleum floor, shattering at the screen. Officer Miller, the bailiff, had his hand on his weapon, his eyes wide with stunned disbelief. Jason stood there, his hand still slightly raised, his chest heaving, the sheer force of his narcissistic rage leaving him momentarily spent. The red print of the gold signet ring was already blooming, vivid and ugly on Elodie's pale skin. He realized what he had done, not in a private moment, not in the confines of the penthouse, but in a courtroom, in front of a dozen witnesses, and in front of a sitting judge. Slowly, agonizingly, Jason turned his head toward the bench. Judge Arthur Vaughan was no longer sitting. He was standing, his black robes hanging perfectly still. He was not red with anger. He was a terrifying, bloodless white. His hands were gripping the edges of the high judicial desk, so hard his knuckles were visible, bone-white knots of suppressed force. He did not shout. He did not bang his gavel. He leaned into the microphone, and his voice, suddenly stripped of its judicial monotone and filled with a cold, primordial stillness, cut through the stunned silence. "Mr. Croft," Jason started to tremble. "Your Honor, she provoked me. She's hysterical. It was a reflex. I didn't mean—" "Officer Miller," Judge Vaughan said, his voice lethally calm. "Cuff, Mr. Croft." "What?" Jason shrieked, as the massive bailiff moved toward him. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding. Ryland, do something." Ryland, his face as pale as Jason's, stood up, trembling, his composure utterly gone. Your Honor, my client is under extreme duress. This is a high conflict hearing." "Silence, Counselor," Judge Vaughan snapped. "You'll have your turn." "Get your hands off me," Jason screamed, trying to pull away from Officer Miller, who was expertly twisting his arm behind his back. "Mr. Croft," the judge continued, his voice resonating with the strength of steel wire, "you have just committed aggravated assault and battery in the middle of a hearing in my courtroom." The cuffs clicked shut. "You can't do this. This is an overreaction. I'm a respected businessman. I'll have your job. Do you have any idea who I am?" Jason was frantic, his arrogance cracking to reveal the raw, terrified bully beneath. Judge Arthur Vaughan leaned further into the microphone, his eyes, which had been so cold and distant to Elodie, now locked on Jason, and they were on fire. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Croft." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was a scream of anticipation. "You're the man who just assaulted my daughter." If the slap had been a gunshot, the judge's words were a nuclear detonation. Marcus Ryland made a small gasping sound and literally sat down hard, his chair skidding back on the linoleum. Jason Croft froze, the blood draining completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, pasty grey. "You're... what?" Jason stammered, his mind finally catching up. "You," Judge Vaughan spat, pointing a shaking finger at the handcuffed man, "are a coward." No, you're... This is a conflict of interest," Jason stammered, desperation replacing shock. "This is illegal. You can't be the judge here." "You're absolutely right, Mr. Croft," Judge Vaughan roared. "I couldn't be the judge on her petition. My personal feelings for my daughter would have required a recusal. But you just solved that problem for me. You just committed a new, violent felony in front of me. And for that, for contempt of court, for assault on an officer of the court, which she is as a witness, I am your judge, your jury, and right now I am very close to being your executioner." He looked at the bailiff. "Officer Miller, add charges of aggravated harassment and terroristic threatening to Mr. Croft's sheet. He is remanded into custody at Rikers Island. No bail." "No bail?" Jason screamed, finally understanding the true, terrifying scale of his demise. "I'm not a criminal. Ryland, sue him. Sue this whole corrupt court." "Mr. Croft," the judge continued, ignoring the outburst, "your assets will be frozen, pending the outcome of your criminal trial. I am also granting Mrs. Croft's emergency protective order. It is now a permanent 5-year order. You will stay 1,000 yards away from her, her home, and her place of business. You will surrender all firearms. You will have no contact. None. Do you understand me?" Jason was being physically dragged backward by Officer Miller, his expensive shoes scraping uselessly on the floor. "This is a joke. You'll pay for this, Arthur. Do you hear me? I will destroy you." "Get him out of my courtroom," Judge Vaughan roared. The doors slammed shut behind Jason, his muffled screams echoing down the hall. The courtroom was silent again, save for Elodie's quiet, ragged breathing. She was still leaning against the rail, a vivid, blazing red print on her pale cheek. Judge Vaughan stared at the door Jason had vanished through, his entire body shaking with the violent aftershock of adrenaline and a lifetime of repressed fury. His eyes were still blazing, reflecting the fire he had just unleashed. He turned his gaze, heavy and damning, upon Marcus Ryland, who looked like a man about to be physically ill. Ryland, the predator, was now the cornered prey. "Mr. Ryland." Arthur's voice was low, rasping, regaining its judicial edge. "Yes, Your Honor." Ryland stammered, pulling himself together. "Your client's behavior was monstrous, but yours was not much better. Those text messages. Your Honor, I was given them by my client. I was acting in good faith," Ryland pleaded, desperately attempting to save his career. "Were you?" Judge Vaughan said, his voice laced with venomous doubt. "Or did you engage in manufacturing evidence and suborning perjury? Because that's what it looked like to me." Arthur paused, straightening his robes, restoring the dignity Jason's violence had momentarily stolen. "I'm referring this entire case and your conduct to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. I suggest you retain your own lawyer, counselor. A very, very good one. We are done here." He looked finally at Sarah Jenkins, who rushed to Elodie's side, placing a protective arm around her. "Miss Jenkins, take your client to the Victim Services Unit. Get her medical attention for that cheek. They will process the order. Mr. Croft's assets are frozen immediately." Arthur looked directly at Elodie for the first time since he had seen her in the beige blazer. His face was a wreck of warring emotions, guilt, pain, and a fierce, terrible love that had been caged for 5 years. He wanted to run to her, to hold her, but the judicial desk still separated them. "This court is adjourned," he said, his voice cracking violently on the last word. He banged the gavel, stood, and walked quickly through the side door to his chambers. The second the door clicked shut, the strict composure he had maintained for 5 years, and fought to maintain for the last hour, shattered completely. Elodie was in a small, windowless room in the Victim Services Unit, holding a cold can of soda to her throbbing cheek. Sarah Jenkins, her hands flying over paperwork, had a look of righteous, triumphant fury. "They're taking him to central booking," Sarah announced. "He'll be at Riker's by nightfall. Ryland is already gone, probably calling his lawyer. You're safe, Elodie. You are actually, finally safe." Elodie could only nod. The reality hadn't set in yet. The slap, the screaming, the profound betrayal and subsequent, terrible vindication from her father. She felt a deep, aching sadness. She had won, but she had been forced to show her father the wreckage of her life. He had been right. All those years ago, he had been right, and she had been too proud to listen. The door opened. It wasn't a bailiff. It was Arthur Vaughan, his black robes gone. He was just a man in a white shirt and a loosened tie. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. Could you give us a minute?" "Of course, Judge." Sarah squeezed Elodie's shoulder and slipped out. Father and daughter were alone for the first time in 5 years. They stared at each other across the small room, the silence heavy with everything unsaid, everything lost. "Dad," Elodie whispered, and her voice broke completely. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. Elodie buried her face in his chest, inhaling the familiar, safe scent of soap and old books, and she wept. She sobbed for the 5 lost years, for the humiliation, for the pain, for the terror. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice thick with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Elodie." "You were right," she cried into his shirt. "You were right about him. I was so stupid." "No, no," he said, pulling back to look at her, his hands holding her shoulders. He gently touched her swollen cheek. "You were young, and you wanted to be loved. I failed you. My pride, my stubborn damn pride. I should have never let you go. I should have fought for you. A father is supposed to protect his daughter. And I let him take you. He told me you disowned me," she confessed, the final, painful shard of Jason's control. "He told me you said you had no daughter. I thought you hated me." "Never," Arthur said, his eyes flashing with the same fire they'd held on the bench. "I have never for 1 second stopped loving you. I was just waiting for you to be ready." "How did you end up here?" she asked finally. "In that courtroom? I thought you were in major cases." Arthur took a deep breath. "It wasn't an accident, Elodie." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean? Judge Peterson's family emergency?" "It was a tea time at Pebble Beach. I arranged it for him 2 weeks ago. I've been keeping tabs. I knew he was isolating you. I knew he'd taken your money. I couldn't do anything until you were ready to leave him. The second your petition hit the system..." He paused, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. "Your legal aid lawyer, Sarah Jenkins? She was my intern in the DA's office 10 years ago. I called her. I told her a friend's daughter was in trouble. I pulled every string I had to get this case. He held her face in his hands. I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined he would be so monstrously arrogant, so stupid as to assault you in front of me. He was right, Arthur said, his voice low and utterly satisfied. It was a conflict of interest. He just created a brand new one, and by doing that, he handed me the authority to destroy him. Thank you, she whispered. Welcome home, Ellie, he said. The fall of Jason Croft was not a dramatic crash. It was a cold, systematic and legal dissection. The media catching the scent of blood, a Wall Street titan, a secret daughter, and a public violent act, dubbed him the slap-happy exec. The assault was an indefensible act. His white shoe law firm dropped him within the hour. No one wanted to be associated with a man who struck his wife, much less the daughter of Judge Arthur, the Hammer Vaughan. Marcus Ryland's fate was sealed alongside his client's. The fabricated text messages, which Arthur had promptly referred to the State Bar Association, were a career-ending blunder. Ryland was disbarred, his career built on tearing others down, quietly and permanently erased. Jason, remanded to Rikers without bail, was a changed man. The charm, the arrogance, the charisma, it all evaporated in the harsh, fluorescent reality of a holding cell. Facing an ironclad criminal case, he took a deal, pleading guilty to aggravated assault and witness tampering. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in state prison. By the time he entered general population, Jason Croft was a man with no power, no influence, and no money. For Elodie, the first few weeks of freedom were a disorienting blur. She stayed with her father in his quiet, book-filled apartment. The 5-year gap was a palpable presence at the dinner table. On the third night, over a simple meal of roast chicken, Arthur broke the silence. She would have been so proud of you, he said, meaning her mother. She would have been furious with you, Elodie replied, her voice soft. For letting me go. Arthur nodded, his eyes glistening. Yes, she would have. I was a fool, Elodie. I let my pride get in the way of being your father. I can never get those 5 years back. No, Elodie said, reaching across the table to take his hand. We can't. But we can start here. The divorce was, as Sarah Jenkins had gleefully predicted, a simple, brutal affair. With Jason in prison and his assets frozen, he had no leverage. Elodie sat in Sarah's new, bustling office. Sarah had since left legal aid to start a non-profit for victims of coercive control, and was presented with the final settlement. He's offering you half of what's left, Sarah said. It's substantial. Elodie looked at the string of numbers. She thought of the cold marble, the joyless closets, the suffocating generosity. She picked up the pen and wrote a large, clear 0 in the alimony column. Elodie, you're entitled to that, after what he put you through. I am entitled to my life, Sarah. I'm not entitled to his money, Elodie said. I will not be tied to him, not even by a bank transfer. I'll take back my name, and I'll take back my art. That's all. She signed the papers. Elodie Vaughan. A wave of relief, so profound it was almost dizzying, washed over her. She was finally just herself. Her new life began with a 4th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. The pipes rattled, and the floors creaked. But the afternoon light that streamed through the 2 large west-facing windows was to her the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She got a job at a small independent art gallery in Williamsburg, sweeping floors and managing inventory. But the painting was harder. For a month, she couldn't touch a canvas. The smell of turpentine made her sick. Jason had not just destroyed her work, He had poisoned the well. She confessed her fear to her father over one of their now sacred Sunday dinners. The next day, a delivery arrived. 3 massive 8-by-8-foot panels of raw plywood, 5-gallon buckets of house paint, and tarps. The note read, "You can't erase these. Stop thinking. Just work." That night, she laid the tarps, cranked up her music, and attacked the wood. She threw paint. She smeared it with her hands. She wept. She screamed. She poured all the rage, the fear, the humiliation, and the shame of the last 5 years onto those panels. She worked until 3 a.m., until she collapsed. In the morning, she awoke to see what she had done. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was violent. But it was the most honest thing she had ever created. A dam had broken. Elodie Vaughan was a painter again. 1 year later, the Williamsburg Gallery was so packed it was impossible to move. Anna, the gallery owner, had given Elodie her first solo show. The small, warm space was buzzing. Elodie, in a simple black dress with a splash of gold paint still in her hair, felt a joy so pure it was almost painful. Through the crowd, she saw him, her father, looking profoundly out of place in his dark suit, a club soda in his hand. He looked awkward, nervous, and prouder than she had ever seen him. He wasn't looking at her. He was standing transfixed in front of the show's centerpiece, a towering triptych on wood. The canvas was a vortex of deep, angry purples and violent slashes of red. It was dark, painful, and chaotic, but from the center, a brilliant, defiant, almost 3-dimensional layer of gold paint seemed to be breaking through the darkness, shattering it from the inside out. The small plaque beside it read, "Lafayette Street." Elodie came to stand beside him. "It's a long way from the major case division, huh, Dad?" she said quietly. Arthur didn't take his eyes off the painting. "I see the courtroom," he said, his voice thick. "I see the anger. I see him. I had to get it out," she whispered. "It was the only way." He pointed a shaking finger, not at the darkness, but at the gold. "But that," he said, his eyes mirroring the light reflecting off the paint. "That's what I saw that day. I looked at you on that stand, and you were terrified. You were hurt. But you didn't back down. You spoke your truth. That's the part that's always been you, Elodie. The part he could never touch. The part that was always going to break free." He finally turned to look at her. "It's not just a masterpiece, Ellie." "What is it then?" "It's your testimony," he said, "and it's the most powerful one I've ever seen." Elodie looked around the crowded room, at her art, at her father. She was no longer Jason Croft's wife. She was no longer a victim. She was Elodie Vaughan, and this was her canvas. The slap meant to silence her was the very thing that set Elodie free. It took a father's principle and a daughter's courage to bring down a giant of Wall Street. But we have to ask, what did you think of Arthur Vaughan's calculated long-game plan? Was it justified for a father to bend the rules to save his child? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and redemption moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more incredible true-life dramas.